So when it comes to the UK, things are getting pretty bad. I mean, it feels like almost every single day something negative happens. And honestly, it's getting pretty hard to keep track of. So today we're going to have a look at the worst articles from the UK in the first half of this year. Because things started off bad and then they got worse. Then honestly, I wondered if we could even make it. So find a good seat while we have a look at the UK's downfall, starting with January of 2024. Because we actually started the month off pretty strong. We had a former military base in the UK that had started to house migrants, and it was about 500 of them. But the problem is that it wasn't a former military base at all, because it actually turns out that it was still being used for military purposes. And it just completely undercuts the safety of, people like local residents as well as the wider public as well. Not to mention it was a total lie from the government whenever they mentioned it. And then the very next day we took a short trip to Ireland, where the so-called Minister for Integration said that 15,000 illegal migrants in the country was, quote, the new normal. And I'm not sure what he thinks the new normal is going to look like, but I don't think it's the future that he had in mind. And then the following day we had a story that was quite similar. We saw how mysterious passport stamps were ending up on migrant passports. They're essentially approving visas and they don't know who or they don't know how they're doing it. They're just genuine passport stamps, and they're ending up certifying illegal migrants as just, like genuine UK citizens like yourself. And they actually think that it could have happened thousands of times as well. And I actually don't think that they have a list, so they can't go back and see who's got one, pretty much making it impossible. Then we needed to clear our minds, so we took a trip to Blackpool. When upon arrival, we saw that they were creating an entire LGBT village. And they were doing this without holding a single vote. Because they don't want to hear public opinion, but they will be spending public money. It's just so weird to see, there's no reason for them to have just an entire village. That's Blackpool. That's a child-friendly, well, at least somewhat of a child-friendly place, but a lot more child-friendly than that. Now I probably wouldn't even want to touch the 2p machines. And then, in another line of so-called just one things, we saw how illegal migrants were to be given luxury flats worth $1,400 a month. This is whilst the local residents, just like everyone else, struggled to get housing. And to be fair for the locals on this one, they actually did manage to push back. They essentially created a campaign and they managed to get their local MP to pretty much reverse it. So it's been paused for now. They haven't said how long it's going to be. I'm guessing just until the news dies down and then they'll be straight back in. Then we had probably one of my favourite videos so far. And like I said, all of these just one thing stories, they only span 1 month. So that pile is getting pretty high. But these speed cameras, like I said, were placed all over Wales, and the actual list itself was just too long to fit onto one image. So what I had to do is I had to get it onto an Excel spreadsheet, resize it, and sort of put it into a different layout, and then put it back into an image format just to fit it on screen. And the thing is, it's still too small to read, but I actually think that that makes it even worse. Because this really is just a cash grab. Because they try and tell you that the police are overstretched. Yet the amount of manpower that it would take to do all of this is absolutely outstanding. I wouldn't be surprised if it's going to earn millions as well as cost millions. Then we had this one from the BBC, again in the same month, where green nutters actually popped the tyres of a Tesla. Because it really does show that there's just no pleasing these people. You can buy the 50 grand electric car, and you can probably put the flag in the window, but they simply don't care, showing that the problem isn't you, it's actually the nutters, because nothing is safe, not even so-called green electric cars. And because the Tesla tyres are popped, the following day we took a taxi to London, where Sadiq Khan was having a few issues with his ULEZ cameras, but there was a problem. He refused to say how many issues he's actually had, and he would not tell you how big of a problem that he's dealing with as well. Essentially, people wanted to know how many ULEZ cameras had been taken down or affected by the Blade Runners, But Sadiq doesn't want to tell you that. He only wants to tell you the information that is positive to him. Anything else, even though it's public, is just held under lock and key. I think the reason why he does it is because he knows full well that the more people that know about what's going on, it essentially sort of normalises it. So I'm guessing his strategy is to try and give the Blade Runners as little coverage as possible, because otherwise he knows it's just going to make more and more of them. And once we've brushed the smell of London off of us, we headed northbound the next day straight to Manchester, where similar to Blackpool's entire village, they've actually created an entire housing development just for the all-important communities. An entire housing development, just LGBT. And to be fair, this is probably one of the biggest examples of division that I've seen in a very long while, because they're just going to block 99% of the population from applying to this place. And if you tried to do it in reverse, you'd get shut down immediately. Then we saw how the city of Bath had created 5 low-traffic neighbourhoods. It was once a conspiracy theory, but now it's happening all around the UK from cities to villages. And all it is just one big attempt to keep you out of your cars. Then we had the long-awaited results from a Freedom of Information request that are made to the Home Office. I essentially wanted to know how many illegal migrants had military backgrounds or records. It seemed pretty basic to me, but I couldn't find the information anywhere. So I did the next best thing that I thought I could do. I put a Freedom of Information request and I thought I'd ask the government. However, they said for me, a tax-paying citizen, that it would be just too much money to get the information. And you can see in the yellow and the orange text on screen that they actually said to me that because it's going to cost more than 600 quid to find the information out, that they're just not going to bother. And like I said, this was to find out whether migrants have military backgrounds. It seems like something they should be doing already. But the thing that I really didn't understand about this response is that they don't want to waste 600 quid on people like me and you. And at the same time, they're handing out millions every single day to illegal migrants. Then once again, we took another trip to Ireland, where the very green town of Donegal was 1% asylum seekers. And it's actually a really nice looking place. But now it's slowly taking a turn in another direction. Because it started with 1%, then it'll be 2%, and then it'll be 3%. All the while people will say to you, they'll say, oh, it's just 1%. Then it'll get to 15 and they'll say the same thing. They'll say, oh, it's just 1%, mate. You know, what are you going to do? Then it gets to 76% and you can see the picture from there. And then we saw Hertz Rental Cars. They're actually one of the largest rental companies on Earth. And they're looking to offload and sell 20,000 electric cars and swap them to petrol and diesel, showing that despite the media push, the free market response is actually telling a different story altogether. I guess either that or Hertz are worried about the tyre poppers from a couple of articles ago. And because of all of this, we just needed to take our mind off of everything for a bit. So we booked a lovely trip to Costa del Sol. But unfortunately, on arrival we saw half the planet, because a 4-star luxury hotel had been given to migrants. And someone actually commented on that video, right? They commented saying, why have they all got the same shoes on? And to be fair, I think they actually are onto something. I'm guessing they're just government-issued shoes, like they gave them to them when they came aboard. But I can't actually remember the last time that the government gave me or you a pair of shoes as well. Actually, on second thoughts, now maybe that's a good thing. And speaking of the police, the annual police budget was announced. It's risen again, wouldn't you know, to £18.4 billion. And if you're wondering where the money's going, well, I guess you could make a Freedom of Information request. But if it's gonna cost more than 600 quid to get the information, I guess they're just gonna turn that one down as well. But actually, on that note, there is an article coming up in a few where you can see exactly where the money's gone, and it's actually worse than you think. But before that, we take another trip back to London, because that really does seem to be the centre of the nuttiness at the moment. And we visited a prestigious university. But the problem? Well, they had introduced a BAME-only scholarship programme. It's a fully funded university course, but you can't apply. I'm guessing maybe if you're BAME you can, but it's very slim odds that you're here right now. But it's more division, and it's all in the same month. And although we're not done yet, I just wanted to take the time to say how big is this hot steaming pile of one thing so far. Again, like I said at the start, this is from the 1st to the 31st, because they try and tell you that it's just one thing. But Jesus Christ, this is getting dark. Because these are all videos that I've made topics on, and it's really getting worse by the day. And we did actually see some positive news as well. Because you can see that the migrant hotel has actually ended its government contract. But you can see by the image on screen that this ain't just no regular migrant hotel. This is absolutely luxury. This has got to be one of the best looking places in the local area, if not the wider county or even more. It's pretty much a castle, but for many years, Sudanese Steve has just been given the keys. And make no mistake, these hotel owners would have earned millions from the taxpayers. And at the same time that they'd have been doing that, they'd have been cancelling weddings and cancelling your bookings. But because our room at the luxury hotel was cancelled, again, we took a taxi to central London. But there was actually a major problem this time, because Sadiq Khan had backed a plan removing the English language requirement for taxi drivers. And it seems even stranger when you consider that London is the capital of England, and that's all taxi drivers not needing to speak English. But this really is a safety concern, and it's also a major concern for the UK future. But can you imagine if you get into an accident whilst in the taxi? You might need medical attention, but the taxi driver, well, he don't speak the language. There's only one word you'll get out of him, and that's Gary. And in another downgrade, we saw the Royal Mail, who my dad actually works for. They say that they might be reducing the amount of days that they deliver your post. I guess that's just how things work these days. Like, you just pay more and more for services, but they actually just give you less and less. I think soon they're probably just going to be sending you emails instead. Then we saw how the UK government had built a mock plane to train how to force migrants onto the Rwanda flights. And honestly, I'd love to see the training on the day, because that's got to be an absolute laugh. But the real problem with this, right, is that we're told that these migrants, they're all good, they're happy days. But apparently it takes multiple men to get these people to board the plane. In fact, I'd hate to see how bad the average grandma comes off when it's her against these guys in the local village. Then we saw how Sadiq Khan's plan of charging you to drive in your capital city actually came to a halt. Because people had gone round putting a few stickers on the cameras here and there, and it's actually really effective. But the thing is, right, whilst you would call this a decent joke, make no mistake, Sadiq Khan would call this a crime. In fact, he'd probably give you a 4-star wanted level minimum. And again, speaking of the police and their billions, it turns out that they've created a bursary for BAME applicants. This is where they give thousands in cash to BAME people for becoming police officers. And it's money that you can't get despite it coming out of your tax money. Again, this is just more division, and the month still isn't over. I can't stress enough to you, don't ever let anyone tell you that it's just one thing. Either they've got awful memory, or even worse, they're out to skew your perception. And then we saw massive government overreach and massive government snooping. Essentially, the government want to start looking at the bank accounts of benefit claimants. Their argument, right, is that the benefit claimants receive taxpayer money. Therefore, the government said their bank accounts should not be private. However, the government also received their wages from public taxpayer money, meaning that it's one rule for them and one rule for you. Because you know full well that you couldn't take a look at Rishi Sunak's bank account, or even anyone far down in the government structure. If anything, they'd call it fraud and they'd probably put you in jail. But an even worse place to visit than there would be this train here. It's being called a beacon of hope, and it's roof to floor in the pride colours. And they must have spent thousands wrapping this train. And they do it to impress like half a dozen people? But still providing zero value to the 99%. And then we saw a video that you guys really responded to, where Hertfordshire Council is looking to spend £7 million on their 20-mile-an-hour zones. £7 million! That's over a 3-year time span as well. And there's no new tarmacking. It's just a few buckets of paint and a few new road signs. And the rest will be spent on council meetings. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if 6 out of the 7 million is spent on council meetings entirely. And before we move on to the next month, which is even worse than the first, it's important to remember that things could actually get better in the UK. Like, they could actually improve. I mean, it is a long shot and it might cost a few billion. But judging by this next month, improvement isn't going to be happening anytime soon. Because these are the worst articles from February of 2024. So we started the month off with nobody's favourite Sadiq Khan. Essentially, Sadiq Khan hates cars and he also hates you. So he tried to give away millions of pounds in taxpayer cash so that you would scrap your fully functioning car for a so-called low emission one. But with this plan there was actually a major problem, because it turned out that 60% of the people who again have scrapped their fully functioning cars have yet to receive a payout from Sadiq Khan. He's essentially left tens of thousands of people with no car or no cash. I mean, he's meant to be their mayor, but to me it sounds like he's done them over. But whilst Sadiq Khan is holding on to your money, the council have just demanded that you give them billions more. Because get this right, I know your council tax is going up left, right and centre, but they say that they would feel comfortable if you give them about £4 billion. To be fair, they haven't actually told us what they've done with the money in the first place that we give them, so I don't know if £4 billion is going to solve the situation. But it's not just your money that the government is after, because after months and months of dispute, the Royal Air Force base known as RAF Scampton is to open to migrants. And what this does, right, is just undercut the safety and security of the local population as well as the wider one, because it's going to be 2,000 illegal migrants just put into a Royal Air Force base. I mean, it's meant to be a secure location, but I mean, it doesn't really sound so secure anymore. Because the thing is, right, you can't visit this Royal Air Force base if you wanted to. I mean, you could step up to the fence, but there is no way they're going to let you on. And the irony is that they've used your tax money to build the place. But when it comes to random people from random places with random backgrounds and random intentions, well, apparently it's all good to let those guys on, but not you. And the thing that I find even worse about this, right, as if it could get worse, is that a lot of these people say that they're fleeing their governments. They even say that they're on the run because they did something wrong. But does that mean that our government should then trust them in secure military sites of our own? I don't know, that honestly to me, that just sounds so backwards. And then the very next day we head to the very green region of Cumbria. There's plenty of trees and there's plenty of fields. However, they've been given 20-mile-an-hour zones because apparently the locals are ruining the environment. And this one really makes no sense, because it's a pretty countryside setting, let's face it. And similar to Wales, you know, it has a lot of village lanes. But now large parts will just be made into 20-mile-an-hour zones completely. And just like the rest of these 20-mile-an-hour zones, right, none of the local population got to vote in any of it. Because we can both guarantee, right, that this is not what the local population wanted, nor is it what they thought they were paying for. And the thing is, right, we're not even at the end of the list. But I can't stress to you enough, all of these stories were within the same month. So it's only like day 6 and it's already very dark. But in order to find out why all of this is happening, we headed to our capital city of London. But just before we arrived, we saw how Sadiq Khan had spent £150 million on a pay-per-mile scheme. And the reason why they do these pay-per-mile schemes, right, is because if you think about it, ULEZ is a pretty decent earner right now. But that won't always be the case, because the ULEZ income will actually decrease at some point in time. Because when people do start to get low emission cars, those £12.50s, they are going to start to dry up. So the way that he's going to counteract against that, right, is by just charging every single car a flat fee per mile. I don't really like to make predictions, but I will make a prediction on this one. In a good few years' time, probably like 5 or 10, ULEZ will be gone, but pay per mile will be in. It's something that I'm probably 99% sure of. But in order to avoid the lunacy of London, we turned around and headed in the opposite direction. And we found ourselves in Scotland, more precisely Edinburgh, where we saw that they may cover the entire city in a LES. And no, not the good kind of LES, because this is a low emission zone, and it's very similar to Sadiq Khan's ULEZ scheme, where tax-paying citizens will be charged to drive in their capital city. And they might have dropped the word ultra from the word ULEZ, but it is still pretty much the same requirements. I guess they're just trying to be a little bit different and just try and spin off and do their own thing. But, you know, that's Scotland for you. And because all of this was just getting a bit too much, We decided to book a trip to New York City. But when we landed, it turns out that half the planet had already arrived. And even worse, the city of New York has given migrants free credit cards. And get this right, they've been preloaded with $1,000 a month each. This is just money for nothing, and if you booked a trip to New York, there is no way they're going to give you $1,000 a month. Like, even if you won a UK game show, the prize money these days is not that much. But with this one, right, I've got to expand a little bit on it. Because a few days after I made that video, believe it or not, there was actually a fact check on this very article, and it came from the so-called reputable Associated Press. And I will read this fact check out for you. It says migrants in New York City will receive prepaid debit cards and not credit cards for designated goods. And that's a real fact check. It turns out that they're debit cards and not credit cards. So that's how you know the story is true. Because when the only thing that they can fact check is whether it's credit or debit, that really is mad. Someone actually wrote that article. I couldn't believe it when I saw that. But after our self-funded trip to New York is over, the bills are really starting to stack up. Because the very following day, it says that Highland Council overpaid 593 former staff, racking up a bill of 863 grand. I mean, who overpays that much money to that many people? That is absolute lunacy. But the reason why they do this, right, is because it's not their money to begin with. Because get this, right, if you ran a business, you would know exactly how many staff you had and you'd know your exact wage bill. You might be off by a couple of pence, but there's no way you're going to be off by this much. They simply don't care. Because like I said, it's not their money, so they don't have that same vested interest that you do. And there was not one mention of these staff members having to pay it back. I'm sure they might have a scheme to be able to claw it back in the future, right? But it could essentially be almost £1 million just, deleted by the council. But in the middle of a sea of bad news, we came across a rare gem of good news, because a low-traffic neighbourhood in Newcastle has been completely scrapped. And even better, they did it a year ahead of schedule. Because it turns out that the local residents are really not on board with all of this. Because whenever they interview someone who's actually like a proponent of all of this, they're always like the local MP, or they'll be like the local 20-mile-an-hour club. It's never just like random Dave on the street who's got an opinion and it's a positive one about them. It's just negative, negative, negative. So the only people that are on board with this are the council. But it is nice to see, because it does actually show you that the local residents can actually stand up and make a change, showing that hope might not be lost after all. But something to completely remove your temporary faith in the council, the next day I found this on the Freedom of Information website. I'll give you the long story short. These are two government logos, and last year they actually swapped between the two. They took the word digital out of one and they kept it in the other. But on the Freedom of Information website, what I found, right, in order to change these logos, the government spent £8 grand changing it one way, and they spent £2 grand changing it back the other way. So almost £10,000 in total just to put the word digital there. But even worse than that, right, there's a free of charge software called Canva. And in the video that I made, I was able to recreate this exact image in 50 seconds. So the government paid £10,000 when they could have just asked a clown. And honestly, I would have done it completely free of charge for them. They just had to ask. And because money's pretty important these days, it turns out, again, the following day, that a major UK company has purchased 1,000 body cameras to help protect its staff. It's a company called ScotRail, and they've made body cameras mandatory for all of their staff members. Because the thing with this, right, is whenever you used to see body cameras, they always used to be on police officers. Like it was just strictly down to them. But now things are that bad that the margins have widened that far that we're seeing regular train staff doing it. And we're also seeing Lidl staff wearing body cameras as well as co-op staff as well. Like, that's how far things have gone. Just everyday people just wearing body cameras. But speaking of people getting in your face when they really weren't invited to, we saw an article from The Big Issue. But this time, we're not going to pay for it. Oh no, because we're going to look at The Big Issue completely free of charge on their website. I guess this does further muddy our chances of getting into heaven, but we'll deal with that later. And this article essentially has migrants demanding free bus passes. They just want free bus travel up and down the entire UK. It might be £5 for you, it might be 7. But Sudanese Steve, he doesn't want to pay a single penny. But the thing that I really didn't get with this article, right, is that these people have spent thousands to get here. Some of these people have probably spent £5,000 on a boat trip just across the Channel. Not to mention the other charges that they've had just to get to France to get to the Channel. But apparently a £2, £5, £7 bus ticket is too much. Like, it really makes no sense. Even if you hate watch these videos, right? Can you please explain to me why these people can't afford bus travel? And much like UK society, it turns out that the UK infrastructure has also taken a turn for the worse. Because you can see that many regions in the UK have become overridden with potholes. And it turns out that Manchester was actually the worst of the bunch, because they've only repaired 19% of potholes in the entire city. Just 19% are getting fixed. It kind of makes you wonder why we bother paying road tax and all of that. Because you pay hundreds of pounds to make your car roadworthy, but it turns out that the councils aren't even making the roads car-worthy. Like you yourself, you've probably paid thousands in road tax and MOTs. It really is a waste of money. And the thing is, we're not done yet because we still got the worst to come. But people will always say to you, they'll say that, it's just one thing. They'll say it's just one article, so there's no point getting annoyed. But the problem is that these one things are really starting to add up. Like, you could argue that the UK's just turned into an absolute mountain of a mess. And honestly, it just seems to be getting worse and worse by the day. I'm sure you've seen it out there. And because things are getting a little bit hectic, we thought we'd take a well-deserved holiday to the Canary Islands. But this time, the other half of the planet actually got the idea as well. Because it says more than 1,000 migrants have reached the Canary Islands in 3 days. That's 1,000 people in 3 days. And I'll put a map up on the screen now. This is an area of water you really don't want to go in one of those dinghies on, because you know full well what's down there. But nonetheless, they'll also be given free accommodation and also free food. And honestly, I never know what the long-term plan is of these people. Because job opportunities on the Canary Islands are not great. They're pretty much just going to be selling stuff on the beach and that's going to be it. That's the cap. But I hope it's worth it, because they've paid thousands to get there. But it's not just migrants arriving in the Canary Islands. We've also got migrants in the UK. Because the following day, we saw how 124 migrants had just arrived in 1 day. This is just going to add up over every single day of the year, to the point where we're just going to end up with tens and tens of thousands of them just coming in. And with Rishi Sunak in charge, I don't think he's got a plan to fix it. And as if you thought the British public couldn't get any more annoyed, we actually saw how £75,000 worth of damage had been done to low traffic zones. They're pretty much just wooden boxes that are just put on the street. But somehow replacing them, the council has spent 75 grand. And the thing is, I know that the brand new cost is going to be quite high, but if you paid someone to do it, like a carpenter with reclaimed wood and just some soil, honestly, he'd probably do it for you for £50 each. But the government can't stop wasting money. But whilst all this was going on, we found some time to sit down and watch History Debunked, where he actually made a very good point. Because those cigarette packages, the images that you get on them, the images on there are some of the worst pictures that you can see. It's just people in a hospital bed, or it's just parts on the table. It's just nasty. And what Simon from History Debunked was saying was that every single image was of a white person. Which is fine, because, England, it's that sort of country. But when you turn the TV on every single night, like BBC or ITV, we really don't see much representation there. In fact, the only place that we over-represent at the moment is on the negative cigarette packages. And honestly, that is something that I've never noticed before. And after we finished our detective work, we found ourselves a little bit hungry. But unfortunately, something that put us off of our food was seeing that there's an area in London where 15% of restaurants have a 0-star rating. That's 15% with a 0 star. You'd think that they'd be shut down, but they're wide open, because they're currently trading to customers and God knows what they're being served. Because the thing is, it is 0 star. You'd really think that it'd be shut down. But I guess we're just living in the past. And because all of this is still adding up, The very next day, because this was quite a bad month, we saw how 20-mile-an-hour zones were being marked with red paint. Like just curb to curb, just red paint. The council essentially did this to warn people that they're going into a 20-mile-an-hour zone. So they're essentially warning people over a crime that they haven't actually committed. And there's two crazy things about this, right? First of all, it cost 14 grand. There are a couple of different locations, but that is paint on the floor. There is no way that this should cost 14 grand. But something that a viewer mentioned, and it is actually a very good point, is how would this affect the stopping distance of motorbikes in the rain? Obviously it's going to do it with cars as well, but with two wheels they've just got less traction. Because something tells me if you try and stop on a motorbike on wet red paint, honestly it's not going to go down very well. But whilst we were going through the 20-mile-an-hour zone, we stopped off at a local Tesco, where we saw kids' pencils being security tagged. They literally cost £2 and they've all got tags on. And the thing is, right, it's not the first time that we've seen this. There's things like milk and cheese, there's, to be fair, well there's Ferrero Rocher, but I do kind of get the Ferrero Rocher. But £2 pencils, that's not something that I can get behind. And the thing is, right, when it comes to all of this, I do actually think that these companies are partly to blame. Because if we have a look at this next article, you can really see what the problem is. You've got 524 individual companies just underpaying their staff. And it turns out that it was 172,000 staff that were underpaid by £16 million. Like, I know you should always check your payslip when you get it, but you just don't expect major companies like EasyJet, the NHS and some councils as well. You just don't expect these people to be paying you less. And speaking of losing money, the very next day another so-called one thing happened, where it turns out that putting migrants in military camps has actually gone wrong. I guess the government should have just read your comments. Because get this right, you know the migrant hotels and they're trying to close them to say that they can save money. And how they're going to do it is they're going to put these migrants in like military camps and places like that. But it actually turns out that it's actually more expensive to keep them in the camps. Like it was actually cheaper when they just had them in hotels. And this was even though it was costing us millions of pounds every single day. I guess that means you just can't trust government promises. But the thing is, right, it's not always military bases that these people are kept in. Because our Home Secretary, James Cleverly, he actually urged Scotland to use a cruise ship to house migrants. Like, and make no mistake, this was a 4-star ferry liner. Like, it's got multiple restaurants and multiple shops. And I know that some of them might be closed. But the thing is, right, half of our high street is already shut. So these people aren't actually any worse off. And one thing that I don't understand, right, is when they want to try and put them on cruise ships. Can you imagine if you went over to Somalia as a migrant from the UK and tried to get a cruise ship from there? Like, there's no way they're going to offer you this level of service. In fact, they probably don't even have migrant programs as it is. Then we had another article in the long line of the government trying to slow you down. Because it turns out, right, that some motorways in the UK have actually gone from 70 to 60. Like they did 30 mile an hour to 20. Now they're just doing it with your motorways. And the thing is, right, as a result of the speed limit change, the council actually earned £8,000 every single day in fines. And these are people just like you and me, just going about their daily business. Now they've got the council breathing down their neck for 8 grand. And the thing is, right, because the council was earning millions, you'll be shocked to learn that it turns out that it's not enough money. Because one part of the UK has raised council tax by 10%. 10%, can you imagine that? And the thing is, right, the locals don't actually get any extra value for money. Like, it's just going to be a dwindling service until there's nothing left. And then the very next day, we actually saw one of the strangest security measures that I've ever seen. Because in Sainsbury's, right, when you go to the alcohol section, it's basically locked away behind a door. But how you open this door, right, is that you essentially ring an AI doorbell who basically just scans you and scans your face. And AI is going to be the judge as to whether or not you've deserved a drink or not. And the thing is, right, what a lot of people were mentioning in the comments, and it is actually a very good point, is that this does kind of seem like social credit scores. Like, it just kind of feels like we've already got the China treatment, but none of us actually voted on any of it. And then the following day, we actually travelled to the Bibby Stockholm. And this is the migrant barge that is going to potentially house hundreds of migrants. And the thing is, right, if you were to ask the government how much all of this cost, you'd like to think that you'd get a basic response. Well, no, because it turns out that the government don't think that any of this information is in the public interest. So they've essentially locked it away behind a freedom of information request and they just say they're not going to give it. Like, this is costing millions of pounds every single day or week, and it's our tax money that they're wasting, but apparently the government don't care. If you did this to them, I'm pretty sure you'd be in jail. And if things weren't dark enough in the UK already, the very next day we saw how streetlights in the UK might be turned off. Like, entire streets just plunged into darkness. And the thing is, right, if you were to speak to a criminal and ask them what their favourite time of day is to commit a crime, you can guarantee that they're gonna say the nighttime. So when they turn off streetlights at night and just make the entire area dark, all they're doing is just giving the criminals a favour. And then we have probably one of the strangest wastes of money that I've ever seen. Because one council in the UK claimed to need £60 million. And what they were going to spend the money on, right, is to de-weed the local paths. Like, that's it. You might need some trimmers or you might need some chemicals. But either way, £60 million, that's just far too much money. Like, even if we all just took them to B&M, there is no way you could spend that much money on cleaning products. But then again, I guess when it comes to the government, they just simply don't care. And before we move on to March, that was a very bad month. I mean, it cost billions and we ended up in a worse place than when we started. At this point, I think I'd call it orchestrated, but I really don't know if the politicians are actually that smart to pull it off. And like I said, it actually gets far worse, because these are the worst articles from March of 2024. Because we started the month off with a very bizarre headline. Essentially, Sadiq Khan was too scared to do in-person events in London, and he made a massive part of his calendar video call only. Which makes no sense, because he's always trying to tell you that London is safe, and he wants you to follow those rules. Yet he doesn't feel safe when he's surrounded by armed security in a well-protected office down the road from the Metropolitan Police Station. Not to mention the whole place is covered in CCTV cameras. So if Sadiq doesn't feel safe there, then how does he expect you to feel safe? And then the very next day we saw how a council in the UK has given away over £3 million. It's been paid to ex-staff, and it's not redundancy. They essentially call them golden goodbyes, but it really just seems like cash out the back door. And something quite a few of you said in the comments below. A lot of people said that these guys will take the payout and then they'll return a couple of weeks later as advisors. So they essentially take £3.3 million to leave, and then they come back a few weeks later with a new role. And I guess the council allow it because it's not exactly their money. And then things started to get even weirder. Because in this particular one thing, we saw how migrants are not allowed security tags. You know, the ankle monitors or the ankle bracelets. It's something that British criminals wear all the time. But when it comes to random people from random places, apparently they're above the law. And what's crazy about this is the reason why they're not allowed to wear them is because the Information Commissioner's Office said that it was a breach of their data protection. Like, these are the guys that are meant to have thrown their passport in places like the English Channel. So they just happily let their details launch into the English Channel, but the police aren't allowed to track their whereabouts. And make no mistake, the police would put you on tag. This really is a good example of special treatment, so feel free to screenshot that one. And then the very next day we saw one of the strangest items ever placed on security watch. Because the Co-op have started selling £1.45 herbal health drinks. It's got things like ginger and turmeric in it and things like that. And it probably tastes absolutely awful. But apparently it doesn't stop people stealing it. Because the Co-op have essentially put it in a suitcase-sized security box. Essentially meaning that you have to ask permission if you wanted to buy this. You just got to take the whole thing to the till. I mean, it's got to take up like a quarter of your basket. And it's £1.45 as well. It's not exactly an expensive item. But I guess as things get worse, it'll just happen more and more. And then we saw what I thought was one of the strangest stories so far. We saw how Bedford Council has updated its website to show over 106 different languages. It's got everything on there from Javanese to Sudanese, making it easier than ever before for people to not learn English. Because this is Bedford Council, they're located in England, but apparently the English language don't matter to them. And the worst is yet to come. But like I said, don't ever let anyone tell you that it's just one thing. Because when it happens every single day, it just grows and grows. The people that tell you that are either stupid, or they're just simply lying to you trying to skew your mind. And that really is why you gotta listen to everyone and every opinion. You gotta come to your own conclusions. And because things continue to just go downhill, the very next day we saw how shoplifting incidents are happening at a rate of 600 every single hour. That's 600 shoplifting cases an hour. Like, that really is out of control. Because that's 600 businesses, and that's 600 people affected. But you know it'll be zero criminals caught, because this is Clown World. And the mad thing about this, right, is if you compared these numbers to when you were a kid, I bet the present day is way ahead. Like even 50 times or 100 times worse. I would not be surprised. And as if crimes couldn't get any worse, it turns out that the police in Scotland, right, are not going to investigate so-called minor crimes. And some of these include things like damage and antisocial behaviour, something that I don't think society should call minor. Because these criminals commit a crime and they essentially get let off. From their point of view, I guess it's a win-win. And then the very next day we saw 27 homes being given away free of charge. But the twist? Well, these homes are reserved for random people from random places. And it's happening all over the UK. In fact, schemes like this have cost us hundreds of millions of pounds. And what I find ironic about all of this is that these people have paid £0 in taxes. They have not contributed, but they are receiving cash back. And then in another line of so-called one things, we also saw how Sadiq Khan had been keeping major secrets. Because after having to repair hundreds of ULEZ cameras, he actually refuses to say how much it's all cost. He's essentially spending your money, but he's not telling you where it's going. Like, I know I'm just a clown, but that really does seem fundamental. If he takes your money, he should at least tell you where it's gone. And then the following day we saw even more houses being given away free of charge. This time it's 40 houses and they're worth 272 grand each. That's over £250,000 spent on migrant homes. And although they don't actually get to keep the house forever, getting these migrants out is going to be almost impossible. Because it could be months or it could be years. But let's face it, it's probably going to be decades. But it's not actually all bad news. Because in a slight sign of resistance, we saw 20-mile-an-hour signs being damaged and brought down. It was actually over 150 total so far. And it's similar to the Blade Runners in London, but this time they're doing it with Welsh street signs. Because what you gotta remember is that the public voted for none of this. So I wouldn't be surprised when they start kicking off. And as if the government hasn't given enough migrants homes already, we saw how migrants have been placed in an old abandoned shopping centre. And it's actually being renovated completely free of charge by the government. Complete brand new apartments just going to half the planet. Honestly, this is UK wide right now. And it just keeps costing more and more money. And as if you thought they couldn't waste any more cash, I've got some bad news. Because town halls and councils in the UK have spent almost £52 million on diversity roles. These are essentially the equality jobs that you see on channels like this one. But unfortunately for the taxpayers, the bill is starting to add up. And look, I'm all for things like wheelchair access. You know, anything that you can do to make it easier for those guys. But that's not the inclusion that they're going on about here. This is just pure cringe. And then we took a trip to London where it turns out that Sadiq Khan was very upset. Because it came out in the news that 450 ULEZ cameras have been destroyed. And Sadiq really wants you to think that it's just a minor issue. But when this many cameras are involved, I think Sadiq's problems are bigger than he knows. And because all of this was getting a bit too much, we decided to head home. But there was a problem. Because they'd replaced our house with a mud hut. Because a company has decided to introduce them to the UK. And no joke, they actually say that mud huts could revolutionise the way that modern houses are built. And look, I know that we used to do that a few hundred years ago. And just like thatch roofing, some of those traditions do still hold up. But I don't think this is going to revolutionise UK home building. Maybe a few hundred years ago, but not anymore. So we decided to abandon our mud hut. And we did the traditional thing of finding the nearest watering hole. And that location just so happened to be Leeds. But unfortunately, on the way, we noticed 13,000 potholes. And this is one city in the UK, but they've just got 13,000 potholes. And to be fair, someone pointed out in that video that things like potholes and ULEZ and 20-mile-an-hour zones, they are actually having the effect of stopping you from driving. I'm sure some are deliberate and I'd like to think that some aren't, but they are still having the effect of stopping you from driving. But I just think 13,000 potholes is way too many. Because I know what you're thinking. Clown. Leeds is a major city, so why doesn't it focus on fixing its roads? Well, it's because the council would rather spend the money on things like this. It was done as part of a Leeds art festival, and it cost 477 grand. And well, it's just wood bolted to the floor. Like honestly, it just makes no sense. It doesn't even have a roof. And it was only temporary, so it's already gone. But they still managed to spend almost £500,000 on it. It's just pointless. But because the council love to waste money and they also love to get in your way, we saw how Hertfordshire Council has decided to go full speed with its 20-mile-an-hour zones. And believe it or not, right, the public actually held a petition against it. But unfortunately, that's just a petition, and you know the council doesn't really care about the public's opinion. Because they want to take your money and they also want to tell you what to do. And when it comes to the both of those, they're definitely not budging. But then we saw something that we haven't seen before. We saw £1.50 chocolate bars in GPS containers. Like £1.50 chocolate bars. And you got to take them to the till and ask the cashier to unlock it for you. Plus you got to carry around half a shoebox in your basket all the time. But not only that, in the same article we actually saw something even worse. Because you got these two here. These are display bottles of fabric conditioner and ketchup. You can see one's empty and one's half empty. And it's the same deal. You got to take it to your nearest employee, and he'll actually give you the full one that's stored behind the counter. And what I will say, right, like I said, people will always tell you that it's just one thing. But I've actually got a folder of 72 photos of security tagged items. Like, that's where we are now. Some of them are like the fabric softener, and some of them are going on cheese. But they say that it's just one thing. But why have I got a folder of 72 things? Like, again, before we move on to the next thing, it just makes no sense. And then we saw a story that the government really should have been able to avoid. Because it turns out that all of these migrant camps in the UK, places like RAF Scampton and the Bibby Stockholm as well, it actually turns out that they're going to cost more than hotel rooms. And I really don't understand how the government didn't know this beforehand. Because either they didn't bother to forecast, or they did forecast and they actually got it completely wrong. But it doesn't matter because we've still got half the planet due to arrive. And just like the migrants once they get into the UK, our next move was to head straight to London, where it turns out that Sadiq Khan had met another ULEZ roadblock. But this one's pretty decent, because people have actually been able to stick bat boxes up the ULEZ poles. They're like £9.99, and they're just putting them right next to the camera. It means that there's a potential that Sadiq Khan and his ULEZ guys won't be able to put a ladder up and fix the camera. I mean, it's a long shot and it is a funny one as well. And it will be very interesting to see if this works. And at £9.99, it's actually cheaper than a ULEZ day pass. And then we saw Cadbury make a very strange move, because they turned Easter eggs into gesture eggs. And it was just in a local area in the UK, the East Midlands to be precise. But you know what the East Midlands is like, it actually looks more like the Middle East. So they changed it from Easter eggs to gesture eggs, just to appease the not-so-British population. Because it's always been Easter to you, and to be fair, it's been Easter to Cadbury for over 100 years. But when it comes to the modern day, I guess they're just gesture eggs now. And as if we didn't have enough people to please, we saw a record number of illegal migrants enter the UK. And smart people like yourself will be able to remember Rishi Sunak's 5-point plan. Because he told you very specifically as well, he told you that he was going to stop the boats. But it turns out that the complete opposite has happened, and we actually have more than ever. And you know what this means. Because record arrivals also means record payouts. The total number's going to go up as well as the total bill. And speaking of record payouts, the government are earning more than ever before through inheritance tax. I really do think that this is the worst tax of them all, and it's gone up by almost £500 million. And like I said, I really don't like this tax, because they'll take your money when you're alive. And they'll also take it when you're not. Honestly, like I said, this is the worst of them all. But because they spend half their day trying to tax you, the government actually forgot to do some of the basics. Because somehow we've got millions of potholes in the UK. I mean, I know they do get round to fixing one or two by you. But honestly, with thousands popping up left, right and centre, I really think it's just going to get to the point where we're all just going to need 4x4s. To be fair, actually, that's probably just going to make the road even worse. So January was bad and Feb was worse. But in March, honestly, half that stuff would have been a conspiracy theory 12 months ago. And that's the large stuff as well. Not to mention the smaller things, like the things that just go unnoticed. Like the £1.50 chocolate bars in shops. Things like that, they always get me. But get ready, because you're about to see the worst articles of April 2024. Because we started the month off with my personal favourite fact. And if you watch nothing else in the video, I need you to remember this. England is the 8th most populated country on Earth per square mile. I'll say that again. We are the 8th most populated place on Earth by square mile. Not 104th, not 167th. We are 8th. In fact, in terms of population per square mile, which really is the true correct way of measuring it, we're next to India and Haiti. But apparently it's all well and good to say that they've got a population crisis. But when it comes to England specifically, if you were to say that we have a population crisis, well, they'd call you all sorts of names. So I would highly recommend that you screenshot that now. And you can check the numbers out for yourself. But with full credibility, that is true and accurate. So like I said, the next time someone tells you that we need to take on more people, just remind them, and don't deviate from this as well, don't let them get you off this subject. Just remind them that we are the 8th most populated place on Earth. And with that in mind, we went into the following day, where I won't dwell on this one too much because you've already seen the state of the roads near you. But it turns out that you're actually not alone, because there are millions of potholes in the UK, and they're going to cost many more millions to fix them. So just like the government, it's a problem that's not going away anytime soon. And speaking of things that are unfortunately here to stay, we saw how a migrant hotel had earned over £150 million. And they've done this basically just from the taxpayer. They're just housing half the planet and they're just receiving government payments. And they've been doing it a couple of years now, so they're at £150 million from us. And all this money is just being spent on people who have paid £0 in taxes. I mean, I'd ask you to make it make sense, but I did call it Clown World. And then we saw another strange article. We saw security tags being placed on Werther's originals. I'm sure you know him, it's an old-timer's favourite. But now it's got a security sticker on it, and they were blaming the silver shoplifters. Which, I mean, that's not the colour that I had in mind when I pictured security tags. It definitely wasn't silver. But apparently it's all well and good for the media to just pick on that colour. They can just pick on the over 60s. But that is the only place that the media will go. So like I said, I don't think it's the silver people. And then we saw another migrant hotel, but this one, it was actually a Best Western. So it's not like it's the worst place on Earth. But what you're looking at there, right, is a photo of bin bags of mouldy clothes of the migrants. Honestly, like I said, if you zoom out on the full picture, I'm fairly certain that's the kitchen. But either way, these are bin bags full of mouldy clothes. And I'm sure we're going to get the bill for all of this. We'll get the bill to pick it up, we'll also get the cleaning bill. And if anything needs replacing, we'll probably get charged with that as well. Ironically, it's probably just going to happen again in 3 months' time. But imagine that, the state of your kitchen. That's awful. There must be 50-60 bin bags there in the full photo. But it might not have to be forever. Because the very next day, we saw how the government might actually be able to open RAF Scampton. It's a military base and obviously it's meant to be kept secret. Because they're going to have some pretty top-level security. And even though you've paid your taxes to help build this place, you can't visit it even if you wanted to. But random illegal migrants are just allowed in, no questions asked. Ironically, they haven't paid a single penny in taxes, so they didn't help build the place. So I really don't see what they're doing inside. That is, to be fair, if the government can actually get them inside as well. But to the government, it actually seems like it's okay what the migrants do. I really don't think they care. Because they're more concerned about what you get up to. Because police in parts of the UK are now asking residents to monitor other residents' speed. And they're going to be able to give volunteers high-vis jackets as well as speed cameras. And they're just going to stand on the street corner so they can get your speed as you're coming in. Like, these are community people. They're going to be volunteers. It's completely unpaid as well. And they just want half the village to just snitch on the other half. And also, it does kind of make you wonder what the police actually get up to anyway. Because why are we just literally just going to do their job for them? Like, that is genuinely what we pay them for. But now they're just going to outsource it to the general public. Unbelievable. And because the police are looking to slow you down, obviously with the help of the public, they've managed to open yet another 20-mile-an-hour zone. This time it's in a part of Coventry. But it doesn't matter where it is, because like town by town, city by city, village by village. Slowly but surely, you must admit the UK is turning into a bit of a 20-mile-an-hour zone itself. But that's what people do. They'll just say, oh, it's just one town, mate, it's all good. But they'll do that every single time, and then before you know it, you're 60 towns in, and it's like half the UK. Which is even stranger when nobody got to vote on any of this. That's a good sign for democracy, isn't it? And because crime seems to be getting out of control, we saw Morrison's install AI security doors. And this particular Morrison's has been able to lock the alcohol away. So you have to ring a doorbell, like an actual doorbell. Then the shop assistant comes over, then they open the door for you. Then they just have to watch you carry the alcohol. Like, honestly, I know it's a security measure, but it really is a strange one. I can see why they do it, but I just wish they didn't have to. And with all of this mayhem that's going on, you know full well that the politicians would not protect you. But what we saw the next day shows that they might actually want to draft you so that you can protect them. And this is coming from a former MI6 chief who wants you to be forced into wars. Like, these are wars that you didn't start, and chances are, there's a good chance that you don't agree with these wars. But that won't stop the government from asking you to fight. I mean, I say asking, no. That won't stop the government from forcing you to join them. Like, they don't even want to give you a say, they're just going to draft you. I got a lot of respect for people in the military, but I think we can tell this MI6 chief to just swivel. Because overseas, they'll happily tell you what to do. But it's no different when you get back home. Because the very next day, we saw a low-traffic neighbourhood in the UK. I'm sure you've seen them. It's the ones with the wooden boxes where you just can't drive through. I'll put a photo up on screen now. And those wooden boxes, right? Like, I don't agree with them. I don't think they should be there. But they do actually do a good job. Like, if you wanted to stop traffic, you would put the boxes there. Seems pretty straightforward. But the problem is that they don't make any money. You just can't make any cash from these wooden boxes. So one council in the UK has actually removed these boxes altogether, and they've replaced them with cameras. So they tried to make it into a low traffic zone, and that did reduce the traffic. But now you're welcome to drive straight through if you want to, just as long as you give them money. Like, honestly, that is an absolute scam. They don't care about the low traffic. They genuinely just want your cash. It's as clear as day now. And even when they do take the cash, you know they're not going to put it to good use. Because as we saw in this next video the very next day, we saw that Southend-on-Sea was actually given the award for the most amount of potholes in the UK. Because it was estimated, right, that over 15% of their roads were covered in potholes. Over 15%. And these local people, as well as the whole of the UK, they've paid decades of road taxes their entire lives. But apparently almost none of it has been spent on the actual roads themselves. But whilst the council just waste your money, private companies are out there pushing the agenda. Because we saw a train company in the UK paint their second train in a pride flag. Honestly, I really don't think any of the locals actually asked for any of this. Not to mention the customers, which again, there was just no need for this. I think even members of that specific community, just like the two women that I live next door to, I even think that people like that, I just think that they've had enough of stuff like this. Because a train should look like a train. It shouldn't look like Jedward. But whilst the government are just turning a blind eye to all of this cringe, they're not turning a blind eye to you. Because we saw a job listing, which was actually removed the very next day. where Universal Credit were looking for 25 spies to employ. And obviously we all know that, like Universal Credit and the DWP, we all know that they spy on everything that we do. But in this job listing itself, the thing that got me, it wanted people with good levels of fitness to wear covert audio equipment. So good levels of fitness, covert audio equipment. I know it's not right, but there's no other way to look at it other than just basically just really fast people. Just wearing wires. Honestly, it's just, I'll put the specific line up itself, but that really, really got me. Honestly, it sounds mad, but that's the job description. I don't know how else to read it. And judging by what we saw the very next day, it might give you a good idea of just who the DWP's looking to employ. Because we saw tens of thousands of pounds in wages just going towards the diversity agenda. And these particular jobs were based in Warwickshire. I'll put them up on the screen so you can see just how much they were paying. But honestly, I wouldn't even blame you if you wanted to apply. Because some of these are pretty much like triple the UK real average wage at the moment. And what, just for doing some pointless job that no one even cares about? Again, if you do apply for this, let me know how that application goes. But whilst the government have money to spend on the cringe, they don't have money for your roads. But this time it's actually causing more money to be paid out. But this time it was actually in the form of compensation, because we saw over 1,000 drivers in Stoke-on-Trent being paid out, and this was just for pothole damages as well. And as you can see here, I'll let you read it, but as you can see here, right, one pothole claim was paid out £46,000, and that's just one claim. I would love to see the damage caused by that one. Honestly, if they're making these sorts of payouts, I might just start aiming for the potholes myself. Because instead of fixing the roads, well, the council just decided to just block them off instead. But after a lot of public pushback, an area in Newcastle actually had its low traffic zone removed. And as you can see by the photo on the screen, I could talk about this one all day. But that photo right there, that tells you all you need to know. Things like that really shouldn't happen. Seconds count. It's a fire engine. Seconds count. And they're sat there trying to disassemble a gate. Oh. But whilst the firemen do spend their 5 minutes unlocking it, we take a short trip to Northern Ireland, where we saw even more pothole payments being paid out. But this time it wasn't thousands. It was £25 million over 5 years. £25 million. And it turns out that the average payout was over £2,200 each. So like I said, maybe I've been dodging them this whole time. Maybe I should just start driving right into them. But whilst we were on our way, we decided to take a trip to the nearest Tesco, where we saw a security tag had been placed on chicken. And I know that together we've seen a lot of security tagged items on this channel over the years. But I think we can all agree that it's pretty funny when they start tagging the chicken. And I'll leave that one up to you in the comments to explain to people why they've tagged this item. And speaking of certain people doing certain things, we saw how in London, a phone is stolen every 6 minutes. Which, to be fair, is a pretty decent stat to measure it by. I really would love to see this on a chart. Because this is 24/7, and my guess, to be fair, is it's just going to get far worse. That's a phone every 6 minutes. You really can't just walk around your capital city these days. And I know that it's not all to do with Sadiq Khan. But if things were going well, right, we can all agree that he would take full responsibility if things are going well. But things are going awful, so he should probably take responsibility for that as well. I mean, it just seems fair to me. But it's not just crime in the cities that you need to be on the lookout for. It's also the crime in your house. Because Gloucestershire had been awarded the title of the most burgled area in the west of England. And this is your home, it's meant to be safe. But our laws in the UK, they pretty much just leave you defenceless. Because you can't really call the police in a situation like that either. Well, obviously you can, but only once it's happened. Meaning that they're not actually going to be there to stop it. They can only respond once you've been burgled. So at the risk of sounding cringe, that means that you are the head of security in your household. So it really would be wise to just figure out what it is that you can do specifically to try and avoid situations like that. Whether it's a camera above the front door or even like a massive floodlight or something like that. According to that article, it looks like you're on your own, so it would definitely be good to take some measures. But whilst burglaries are up, it turns out that it's not all bad news, because it looks like Sadiq Khan and the rest of the ULEZ gang are actually overstepping their mark. Because 75% of ULEZ fines in Kent have gone unpaid. That's 75%. And I'm sure not all of them are going to be from people resisting. But that is still a major pushback. I really did not expect it to be that high. Even something like 25% unpaid, maybe. But 75% of these ULEZ fines going unpaid. Like I said, the general public have really had enough of this. But as always, right, not paying a fine, that is a tricky issue. So I don't know what I would recommend. I'd say do it on a case-by-case basis and just do what impacts you the least. But whilst Khan collects your cash, the UK government are just taking it out of somewhere else. Because we saw Leicester Council look to purchase their 35th migrant home. This is one place in the UK and they're on their 35th home. And you can see on screen that they originally had 27 already sorted. But for some reason they just want another 8 more. And these migrant homes, if you do the two figures and divide them, it works out that they cost 246 grand each. Once you've furnished them, that is going to be over $250,000. And that has just been given to people who have paid 0 in taxes. Like, it is not because I'm harsh, it is literally just maths. But sometimes councils find themselves in a position where they've got more migrants than houses. So they have to fill them in right up to the legal limit. Because we saw even more HMOs pop up over the UK. And a HMO is a house of multiple occupancy. And one of the houses in this article, right, it was being transformed into a 9-bedroom house. Like, can you imagine that? Just living next door to 9 migrants. Like, I could sit here all day making examples of what that's going to be like. But 9 migrants next door. You wait till the summer barbecue of these residents. These guys will be looking over the fence saying, what type of meat is that? You know they'll only have it one way. And because of things like that, no one wants to live next door to a HMO. We decided to flee the scene and we came right back in the opposite direction, where we saw how the cost of the RAF Scampton migrant camp had increased by 540%, because it had gone from 5 million to 27 million. And if you're thinking that it sounds like an absolute scam, I don't know how to break the news to you, but it is an absolute scam. Because can you imagine being like a self-employed person and you give someone a quote for 500 quid and halfway through the job you come back and say, nah, it's not 500 quid anymore. It's more like £2,700. That is literally what's gone on here. And with this RAF base that they want to put these migrants in, it's already built. Like, it might be a couple of bunk beds and that's it. It is built. There's nothing, like, it's built. It's done. It's built. 27 million. It's done. Like, what? But whilst our government increases the bill by 540%, the Scottish government are looking to spend over £45 million on 20-mile-an-hour zones. And get this right, this is to cover almost 36,000 roads. Like, this sort of stuff would have been a conspiracy a couple of years ago. They'd have said you're crazy. Honestly, they would have said you're losing your mind. I think kind of like, you know that Sadiq Khan pay per mile? The way that he says, it's not on the table, pay per mile, it's not on the agenda. Go back a couple of years and 20 mile an hour wasn't on the agenda either. So the push that we've seen for these zones are pretty bad. And it's even worse when they send you a £45 million bill. Honestly, it really is insane how they come to these figures. Because other than a couple of metal signs, maybe some paint in the road, that's it. But no, it's not done apparently. Much like RAF Scampton. Already built, 27 million. All they got to do is just put these road signs up. 45 million. Madness. And on the drive back from Scotland, we decided to take a trip to Tesco, where we saw that Tesco has actually put up a brand new security measure. Basically, they'll keep those doors locked until they look at you on CCTV and just check that you're not a nutter. Like, imagine that, just like people, essentially you've got to ask permission to go into Tesco. And you might have been going to this Tesco, right, for 10, 15, even more years than that. But now it doesn't even matter if it's raining outside. They'll make you wait out there until Tesco can confirm who you are. Like, I do fully understand why Tesco have to go to these measures. It's just a shame that they have to in the first place. Because when you were younger, shops were pretty chilled out. But now you'll be lucky if Tesco actually let you in. So just down the road, we managed to find another shop. But this time they were selling something pretty grim. Because they were selling crickets, pre-blended and ready for you to eat. Like, honestly, crickets, imagine eating that. And this particular meal, right, was chili con cricket. So you can imagine what the main ingredient is. It is just awful to think about. Just the thought of these little fellas on screen, just creeping their way into your food. Actually, to be fair, they're not the ones doing the creeping. It's all of the governments as well as the companies which is doing the pushing. So you can't really actually blame the crickets. But I still don't want them anywhere near my food. So I think the answer to chili con cricket, it is just no. Like, it is genuinely a flat no. It's not happening, and they can absolutely swivel. Honestly, I think the worst article for me in that month was the potential draft. Because, not only are the politicians completely ruining the UK, but they also want us to go to war so that we can waste billions there as well. Like I said, things are going from bad to worse. Because you might be thinking that we've hit rock bottom, but unfortunately not. Because these are the worst articles from May of 2024. Because not only can you see Sadiq Khan looking like a pretty dodgy fella about to offer you sweets, he's actually gone one step further, and he's offered to buy nappies for anyone that he sees shoplifting. Like, just full on offered to pay for all of the shoplifting. But there was a big problem with Sadiq's statement. He hasn't actually done it yet. So he wants the credit for doing the good deed, when he hasn't actually done the deed itself. And I know that Sadiq is not usually the one to do this, but I do actually think this is a pretty clever move. So I would say that this might be Sadiq Khan's first ever IQ point. But to be fair, we saw straight through this after about 10 seconds. But someone with a similar IQ to Sadiq is whoever's made this article for GB News. To be fair, it was probably this one here. Because it says that the majority of GB News viewers are actually Labour voters. Which, I really don't think anyone forecasted that at all. Because they have actually done some pretty decent work at GB News. They've got some good hosts with a lot of good people. But unfortunately, they've also done quite a bit of bending. And the very next day, we saw something else bend the rules as well. Because we saw this from the Welsh Government outside of a school. Believe it or not, right, this is a 20-mile-an-hour sign. To be fair, they would call it a 20 sign, but I think I would call it a blurring of the law. Like I said, it's meant to be a 20-mile-an-hour sign. But this isn't a joke, and it's not like the ones where they just get the local kids to make them and put them in the local community. Like where they just put them on every single lamppost. This is the official sign. And what gets me right is that they say that you're the dangerous one. You're just that dangerous that you need the government to tell you what speed to travel. But they're going to put up a road sign outside of a school with a tongue and a tail. Like what? I know seconds count when you're driving, but this is just unbelievable. And because the government they're just crazy about slowing you down. It turns out that the general public are actually starting to stand up. Because almost 2,000 ULEZ cameras have literally been taken down. And they've done this in less than 1 year. Which I can only imagine how Sadiq Khan feels about this. Because he needs you to quite literally needs you to think that everyone is on board with ULEZ. And he pretty much wants you to think that it is 100% success rate. But articles like this one just show you that Sadiq is actually on the losing end. But again, the very next day, because this month is just weird, it turns out that Sadiq Khan is not the only one looking to take your cash. Because according to this article, 3 out of 4 burglaries in the UK go completely unsolved. That's 75% where the police can't catch the criminal. And this is it's your house. It is meant to be safe. It's meant to be the safest place that you've got. But as you can see on screen, that works out to almost 250,000 households every single year. 250,000 burglaries every year where the police can't catch the guy. 250,000. That is awful. But it's not just the crime in your house that you need to look out for. it's also the madness that's happening down the road. Because this article that we saw the very next day was about shoplifting specifically. But even more precise than that, if you check that second line there, the smaller one below the headline, it says that crime is at its highest level in England and Wales for 20 years. And this is something that we've all known before. It's something that you felt, pretty much as you walk around your own country. So you could see this happen from a long way away. But when you see it laid out in a sentence like that, it really does show you how bad things have gotten. I would imagine in a couple of years' time that's going to be upgraded to 30 years. And like I said, things are not going to improve anytime soon. Because what we saw the very next day, it's only going to add to the situation. Because we saw 711 migrants cross the Channel in one day. And if that sounds high, then it's because it is. Because that's the highest number that we've had so far this year. That's 711 random people. And let's say, let's just say for the maths, let's say that all 711 paid £1,000. That is 711 grand. That is just spent by people crossing the English Channel. I'm pretty sure they could, first of all, where did they get that money? But I would really love to know, could they not just put that money to good use elsewhere? I've never been to Sudan, and I don't think I'll be going anytime soon. But I really think that £1,000 goes quite a long way in Sudan. But when the migrants do eventually land on the British coast, I think they're going to be pretty confused because they're going to be wondering why everyone is driving so slow. Because Lyme Regis, which is a town on the south coast of England, it's looking to turn into a 20-mile-an-hour zone. And this isn't just a few small roads or like places like schools and hospitals. They're going full force with the meaning of zone, because it is the entire town. And you can see by the map on screen, but basically everything that is inside that red circle, every single road, they're trying to turn into a load of 20-mile-an-hours. And what gets me about things like this, right, is that this town, and to be fair, you can see it from the map, this town just looks like every other town in the UK. There's a very good chance that you live in a very similar place to this. And if it could happen to them, then obviously it could happen to us. And because we like numbers, but numbers really don't like us, we saw that out of almost 30,000 illegal migrants, only 155 had been removed from the UK. That works out to 0.5%. Those are the people that have been essentially sent back home. That is absolutely mad. Because obviously everyone knows that the British border is just completely wide open right now. It's no secret, everyone knows that. You'd like to think that they've got a solid solution on what happens when they actually do make it in. You'd think the government would have something in place to counteract the fact that our border's just completely wide open. But they don't. It's wide open, so they let them all in, and then when it comes to getting them out, they leave 99.5% in. Honestly. But to take our minds off the lunacy, because I think we're going to go insane, we had to take a trip up north. To be more precise, we went to Hadrian's Wall. But unfortunately, when we arrived, it turns out that it needed some decolonisation, because this is a new job that they're putting in place, and I'm really not sure what they're going to be doing. But they're paying these people £475 a day. So like I said, just decolonise Hadrian's Wall. It's history, they should just leave it alone. But instead they're going to give someone 475 quid to, I don't know, put a few signs up or something. But because the council are not exactly known for spending money wisely, we saw a pothole that is older than my daughter. Because this was 11 years old. Imagine that, 11 years old. And this particular one was located in Essex. But honestly, it's really not an award that any council wants to win. But somehow they've managed to leave this one in the ground for over a decade. That really is awful. So they've either left it in the ground for all that time, or they have filled it in, and whatever they used has essentially just crumbled like Weetabix. Again, it really makes you wonder why we even bother paying road tax. And speaking of things just crumbling away, the very next day we saw how bad things are at the UK border. Because we've paid £700 million to France to protect it. 700 million. But if you were wondering, if we actually got good value for money with that, well, it turns out the government are not going to tell you. In fact, it's actually being kept a secret on the government website. They used to give you the numbers, but now for some undisclosed reason, they've decided to just remove that column entirely. So like I said, we're paying the French almost £750 million. And we're not able to see if it's money well spent. That is absolutely awful. But the French aren't the only people that are trying to sort out the border. Because Keir Starmer's trying to do it, and he's got a really weird way of going about it. Because Keir Starmer has decided to make a day one promise of cancelling every single Rwanda flight. He just wants to scrap the plan entirely. And what gets me about this one, right? Not only is it a day one promise, but the very fact that we've already paid hundreds of millions of pounds to Rwanda. Like, we've already given them the money, but I really doubt that we're going to get any refunds. In fact, I'll actually put it on screen for you now. It says that the government has already paid Kigali £220 million. And Kigali is the capital of Rwanda. But that's almost $250 million. And there's going to be no refunds. You know, there's going to be no chance at getting this back. I don't even think the Rwandans still have it. But that is Keir Starmer's day one plan. Like, day one. Essentially meaning that Keir Starmer just wants to delete £220 million. And he wants to do it on day one. That is absolutely mad. And you'll have to forgive the highlights on the next article. It was left over from the video itself. But it was about freedom of information requests. It's something that I would say is actually pretty important. But it turns out that the government would completely disagree. Because we saw how only 34% are being answered. That is 34% of freedom of information requests. That is absolutely crazy. 34%. Because let's imagine this, right? Let's say that the wife asks you a question, and she demands to know the answer, so she puts you on the spot. Now let's say that you do the clever thing, and you turn around and you say, listen, I'll only tell you 34%. Honestly, how is that going to go down for you? Do you really think the missus is just going to accept it? Absolutely not. But when it comes to the tax-paying public, apparently the government just think that we're going to accept it as it is. But 34% of freedom of information requests. That is so low. Only 34% are being answered. Like, what are they doing that's so dodgy? But the next day we did actually see some slightly good news. Albeit it's probably too little too late. Because we saw how a government minister has announced a ban on diversity-related jobs, and this is to do with the civil service. The article actually describes her as a common-sense minister, and whilst I would say that this is common sense, I don't think I'm ever going to give someone that cringe level of a nickname. Like they work in the government. There is no common sense. But like I said, this is actually a move in the right direction. Because these diversity jobs, they've just been going on for so long now. Like, if anything, most of the places that you come across, most of them do have these sorts of jobs. And all they're doing is just getting rid of the civil service ones. I mean, it's a good start. But I really don't know how much they're going to be able to reverse this. Because like I said, this push has been in place for far too long. And as a result, they're now coming after your work Christmas party. To be more precise, they're demanding that you make it more inclusive. Because obviously not everyone drinks, and we know that. But this article says that 34% of the workforce, 34% have a problem with drinking. I really don't think that 34% includes people like us. Like, obviously there will be a minuscule amount of British people who are against it, but it's not going to be a large chunk of the population. If anything, it's to do with the Muslim faith. Because as you might know, alcohol is actually banned in that religion. They call it haram, but we're just going to call it banned. Meaning that they can't have alcohol at these work parties. And if you ask me, I think that's where the majority of the 34% comes from. Because if we're not going to drink with them, what are we going to do? Just play pass the parcel with these people? I don't think so. But whilst people are after your drinks, other people are trying to cross the UK border. Because our government have given the super trustworthy nation known as Albania, our government has given them £1.6 million. And that money is to be used for drones to search for migrants. Like just genuine drones just flying around the Albanian border.
They're also going to be looking for number plates of specific cars that they know do the smuggling. And all of this is costing 1.6 million quid. Now I know what you're thinking. Clown, how can we spend 1.6 million pounds when the government has never bought me a drone? And again, you're absolutely spot on, because the government has never bought you a drone. Yet when it comes to Albania, apparently it's just covered by our taxes. Like 1.6 million, I suppose if it does the job, then it's not exactly the worst waste of money ever. But knowing this government, I don't even think they're going to give us any statistics. And then we got onto one of my personal favourite videos so far. Honestly, I was just laughing through the entire thing. Basically, as you're aware, half of Africa want to come to the UK. Well, roughly. But it turns out, and I have double-checked this with the map data, it turns out that Africa is 125 times the size of the UK. 125, yet they want to come here. 125 times the size. And there are some, half-decent-ish places in Africa. It's not all clay roads. I mean, look at this one, for example. Not a pothole in sight. So like I said, there are some half-decent-ish places in Africa. You might have to root them out and go searching quite far. But if you're born in somewhere like Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, Somalia, one of the more Ross Kemp type places, honestly, moving to somewhere like Rwanda or Nigeria, it's definitely a step up. It might not be England, it might not be Britain, but it is going to be a step up from their original country. But instead of travelling thousands of miles, as well as paying thousands of pounds to do it, all they'd have to do to just go to a new country is literally just cross the border. It might even be a couple of miles away from their original position. But no, they don't want to cross the border. They want to do the 1,000-mile plan. It really makes no sense. Then you remember that we have universal credit. And that is pretty bizarre, but I don't think it's as bizarre as this next story. Because they're trying to get you to eat the bugs once again. But how are they going about it? But basically they did a survey, and they asked people if they would eat insects. Obviously we're all aware that we're not going to eat bugs. People keep trying, but like I said, it's just not happening. But like I said, they needed a survey to tell them that. And this isn't just like a random survey either. This is from a university based in Leicester. And they needed a survey to tell them this. I mean, they really do sound like a pair of bug eaters themselves. But the results that they got was that only 13% of people would be willing to eat bugs regularly. I mean, that is pretty surprisingly, that is 1 in 10. So that is pretty high. But 13% of people would eat bugs regularly. I'd like to know who this 1 in 10 is, because I don't think they're going to be a friend of the channel. But the very next day, because again, this was a very bad month, we saw how people were taking hammers and lighters into shops. And they were doing this so that they could break those plastic security tags off of the alcohol bottles. And you can imagine what it's like being a shop assistant at Tesco's. Imagine you've got to make the choice between doing nothing and interfering with someone who's clearly a bit loose. Because when you visit any shop, you pretty much just take your debit card. You're not sat there taking hammers and lighters. But whilst we're surrounded by all of this negativity, we actually did see one positive story. We actually did see some good news. Because Anne Robinson from The Weakest Link has given away £50 million to her family. Now, I do agree that this is, it's basically just a rich person doing rich people stuff. So I don't think it's a situation that many of us are going to get into. They're essentially taking pretty much half. Half of everything that you've ever worked for. When you move on, they just take it. Not only that, right, you've paid 20% income tax on that alone. Not to mention all of the other taxes that you've paid. So you pay all of these taxes when you're alive. Then they have the nerve to take almost half when you're not. Honestly, even if I never get to that level, that is absolutely sick of the taxman. And like I said, the government are never going to take that money and put it to good use. And even if you try and help them, even if you try and save them a little bit of cash, the government might criminally charge you. Because it turns out, right, if you want to try and fix a pothole in the UK, if you try and do the government's job for them, like I said, they might actually hold you criminally responsible. Now, I'm not suggesting anyone fill them with what you can see on screen here. Noodles and Cocoa Pops. But if you actually did a pretty bang-up job, Like I said, it doesn't matter the condition because they might still take you to court. All for just trying to fix a pothole. And then because all of this government madness is starting to add up, we actually saw the government make to be fair, a pretty decent recommendation. And that is probably one of the first times I've ever been able to say that. Because the government recommended to stock up at least 3 days worth of food and essentials. And to be fair, it might actually be the first ever time where I'm going to say that the government doesn't go far enough. Because any time that you can rely on yourself rather than the government, any time that you can do that, that is an absolute win. And like I said, for the government to actually say something pretty smart, that is extremely rare. And another thing to keep in mind, right, is obviously only stock up if it's affordable. You don't want to leave yourself short because then you're probably going to cause yourself more danger. But if all it takes is just like an extra 30p pack of pasta, just like every time you go shopping, and yes, it might take a bit more than pasta, but you gotta start somewhere. Because like I said, on a normal day, the government absolutely love to waste your money. But it turns out that they also just love to lose your money. Because HMRC staff essentially lost £1 million worth of equipment. That is 1 million, imagine that, £1 million worth of equipment. Like laptops, phones, computers, tablets, all gone missing. And there's just over 2,000 of them as well. Like 2,000 individual bits of equipment in 3 years. And they were working from home as well. Like how on earth do you lose a computer or a laptop at home? And the thing is, right, if you did this at your job, like if you either lost or stole £1 million worth of equipment, well, maybe not you, maybe spread out across the office, you can only imagine how much trouble you'd get into. Yet when it comes to the government, this has taken 3 years for us to find out.
So we're almost halfway through the year, and like I said, things really don't seem to be improving. I mean, we've lost billions and we've also lost quite a bit of identity as well. I think at this point, it really makes you wonder why we even bother paying taxes. But hold that thought, because these are the worst articles from June of 2024.
So what we're going to look at today is a list of the worst articles in the entire month. And I'll let you be the judge as to whether or not the situation is fine. You know, as the politicians always try to tell you. So we started this particular one off strong, because we saw the Assistant Director of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion for the NHS. And they were being paid almost 92 grand a year. Like, can you imagine that? It's essentially just sending the NHS further down the long slope. Like, that is an absolute waste of money. But one day, right, one of us does have to apply for one of these jobs. Like just applying for a 92 grand job just for a laugh. I would say we'd have a good chance, but I think in all honesty, when it comes to these diversity jobs, I really don't think that we're what they're looking for. And the very next day, because like I said, this is going to be a long slope, we saw corned beef in a locked box in a co-op shop. Corned beef. I mean, it really does just show how far the UK has fallen. Because now we got pastime favourites just being locked in boxes so people can't steal them. And at this point as well, what gets me? They might as well just do everything in the shop. Because if £4 is the cut-off, I mean, that is pretty much 80% of stuff. Like, if they're going to box and tag everything £4 and above. Honestly, I mean, especially when you come to the co-op as well. Because they call themselves a cheap shop, but, I mean, you walk in and the prices ain't cheap. But on the way back from the co-op, we had even worse news than corned beef. Because it turns out that we got clocked by a ULEZ camera. But we're actually not alone. Because it turns out, right, that with ULEZ, £218 million worth of fines has gone unpaid. That's £218 million. Like, you can imagine the nerve on these people. Like, they really are holding the line. Like, I do understand that Sadiq Khan is technically a popular politician. Like, he did win the election. So there are some people that actually are a fan of him. But when you see numbers like this, almost £250 million, essentially just being used as a protest, like, that really speaks volumes. But the traffic problems with the UK, I mean, it doesn't stop with ULEZ. Because all over the country, low traffic neighbourhoods are being installed. I'm sure you've seen them. It's the one where they put the bollards in the roads that you can't drive through. But in one town, right, in Exeter, the public have actually managed to stand up for themselves and they've actually got the council to uninstall them. And it's not every day that we see good news. I mean, to be fair, it's almost never. But to see the public stand up to the council
and actually have these bollards taken down. Like I said, that really does show that people power works. And then to sit down, because we had to digest that we did just have some good news. So we decided to take a halftime break and check out this image. Like, it really does say it all. I mean, it's basically the exact same item in Tesco. It's Jordan's Country Crisp chocolate cereal. It's basically just like posh granola. Or just granola. I don't know, I'm not very posh. So this to me would probably be posh. But like I said, it's gone from £1.99 to £3.25. And I don't know the time frame of when this was done, right? I don't know when the first one was to the second one. But what we do know is that it was that short of a time frame that it didn't even give Tesco a chance to remove the previous labels. Like, that's how short of a time frame this has all been on. They haven't even had time to remove the old labels. Like, awful. And because we wanted to see some of this overpriced granola for ourselves, we decided to get in the car and go straight for Tesco. But on the way, we unfortunately hit a pothole. But again, it turns out that we're not alone. Because you can see this article here, where the council are not going to be fixing this pothole for 2 years. And I have actually had quite a few comments of people saying that they are, like, not obliged, but like, the council does have to fix them within a reasonable time frame. Like, I've had a few comments where people say it has to be less than 6 months. Again, I've had one round me that's been there for at least 9 months, but that's another story. But this one here, right, they say that they're not going to get around to fixing it for 2 years. Like I always say, it really makes you wonder why we even bother paying council tax. But it's not just the potholes that are causing some real problems in the UK. Because the very next day we saw something very strange. Because we saw 2 illegal restaurants in Reading. And in total, the police found 172 sheep heads in black bin bags on their kitchen floor. And they don't actually say where they found, like, all of the sheep heads. I'm guessing they found them connected to a sheep in the field. And then they just did the deed and just took their heads, as well as probably taking the bodies to sell them. But in total, the police found over 400 kilos of unregulated meat. Like, I know I've made some videos on takeaways in the past, but honestly, this is really making me think twice about the actual ingredients. But then the very next day, I was able to find a list of MP expense claims. This is where they can charge, essentially the taxpayers. They can just charge for, like, things that they want to purchase throughout the day. Because the MPs, they get paid almost 92 grand every single year. So these members of parliament, I mean, they're really not short of a few quid. So the fact that we give them 92 grand a year, but we also pay for their expenses, I think that's a bit of a joke anyway. But even more of a joke was the size of some of these transactions. Because I do get annoyed when they start charging like tens of thousands of pounds to the country. But I think we need to remember that there are some people genuinely putting through 1p transactions. Like, that is an absolute joke. Like, I'm sure you're a decent person. But can you imagine just putting through a 1p expense claim? Like, the look that I'm sure you just wouldn't do it. Like, I'm sure you'd have a cut-off. Like, anything less than £5 or £10. You just wouldn't take the mick like that. But maybe you would. But I can't see you claiming for 1p. It's not even worth the time to write it out. But it just goes to show that these members of parliament, they are absolutely in it for the cash. But whilst the MPs are just out there spending money on themselves, they're also spending it on random people from random what a surprise is that? They're spending money on random people from random places. Because we saw how 90 homes were being given away free of charge. Like, no cost at all. Like, 90 homes in total. But these particular houses have been given exclusively to Ukrainians. Like, no mention of people like me and you. We'd love a free house, but it's really not going to happen. And I know it's cliche, like, it is a played out point to make. But it's cliche for a reason. We have British people on British streets. But apparently we don't come first because we're housing half the planet. Like, there's people that would have called this a conspiracy theory. Like, they'd have said, oh, calm down, mate. The government's not giving homes to migrants completely free of charge. But it's already happened, and it's done so all over the country. And because all of these stories are starting to add up, we just needed to clear our heads, so we took a trip to Wales. But it turns out that it wasn't the most relaxing of trips. Because we saw the Welsh Mining Museum. we saw them get told that they need to decolonise the place. And I'm not sure exactly what that means. I did read the article quite a few times, but as always, it doesn't actually give any definition. But like I said, they want to decolonise the history, and they want to do it through the lens of black, Asian and minority ethnic people. Again, this is like deep in Wales. Like, you couldn't get a more Welsh territory. And they're talking about mines that were opened in like the 18 and the 1900s, even before that. So I really don't know how many ethnic minority people there were down these mines. But on the way back from the Multicultural Mining Museum, we decided to stop off at the local Asda, where apparently we saw the same people. Because it turns out that 1/3 of Asda staff have been subjected to some pretty nasty altercations. Because in the article it said things like drivers, like the Asda delivery drivers. It says that they've been chased down the street. And it says that in store, things like watermelon and joints of ham have just been thrown at the staff as well. Like, you imagine just throwing a watermelon at someone in Asda. Like, I'm sure if you're having a bad day, and like, let's say that you get angry one day at someone at the checkout, like when you're paying for your shopping. If you get angry at a nice member of public, you're a nice person, so that probably sits on your mind and on your conscience for a good couple of days. Like, let's say you lost your temper at someone in Asda. Like I said, that is going to sit on your mind for a couple of days. But there are people launching watermelons. Like, there is no comparison. Launching watermelons. What on earth is going on in the UK? That is awful. But on the way back from a very dangerous Asda trip, it turns out that we were right in the middle of a 20-mile-an-hour zone. Because it turns out that we saw the biggest expansion of 20 mile an hour that Britain has ever seen. Because we saw almost 1,500 roads essentially just get turned into 20-mile-an-hour ones. And I know it gets mentioned a lot, right? But that is a very slow speed. Like, the next time you're driving out in a car, I'd highly recommend, just as long as there's no one behind you, I'd highly recommend to just drive at 20. And honestly, just see what it's like. Like, it's one thing if they're going to do it outside of a school. I can kind of understand that. I mean, like, safety first and all that. But almost 1,500 roads. I mean, on this one, the council can absolutely swivel. But speaking of people taking the absolute mick, we saw this attempt at parking. Like, you can see there, they've got an electric car just charging from their house. It's basically just coming out of their front door, or at least just down their garden path, where they've got their electric car half wedged on the pavement and half off the pavement, with the owner just nowhere to be seen. Like, that really is cheeky, from a couple of perspectives as well. Because not only do they have that cable going across the whole path, half their car's on there as well. And this is a problem that's going to happen more and more. Because you got to admit, as time goes on, there's less places to park your car. But there's more people than ever with electric cars. So there's less parking, more cars, so they will need to charge them. And the ways that they do that are just going to get more inventive. Because they do need to charge their cars. And I think that we're going to see some very inventive ways to do that. But because we're not awful people who park half on and half off the pavement with the charger coming out the front door, we decided to have a nice relaxing day. But it didn't last long because we started to look at the national debt. And like, on screen there, you can see just how high and just how fast it's rising. Because that's every single second of every single day. Like, that is 24/7. Just constantly going up. And make no mistake, right, that is in the trillions. So even if the government started to slow it down now, that's all they can do, just slow it down. There's no way they're going to be able to reverse it. Especially not with the government that we've got. Because it really is just cringe from top to bottom. Because the very next day, we saw probably one of the UK's most widely known charities, which is the Royal British Legion. They decided, just like many other charities and companies, they decided that they needed a 64,000 head of diversity and inclusion. That's 64 grand for a job that is going to provide £0 in value. And what that means, right? What that 64 grand means is that for every person that's buying a poppy, obviously a poppy is about £1, but that means that everyone that's buying a poppy, because of this one job, it would take 64,000 poppies just to break even. Like, before this charity has made a penny, they need to sell 64,000 poppies just to cover the head of diversity and inclusion. Like, one job. And you imagine how big this organisation is as well. Like, they really are just taking our money, and they're just taking the mick as well. And it's not just the Royal British Legion either. It's private companies like Tesco. Because you can see on screen here, at a local Tesco, they've installed a security door on the alcohol. Like, not only, I mean, you can see them there. Not only are the bottles just wrapped in a wire mesh, as well as a security tag on top, you've now got these little devices. It's essentially a webcam that goes straight through to Tesco security, and they just check that you're not a dodgy individual, essentially making the British public just ask permission whenever they want to buy alcohol. And it will start in one shop, then it'll be 2, then it'll be 4. Then before you know it, this is just run of the mill, and it's not going to be just Tesco either. It's going to be places like Morrison's and Asda. Then we'll just get normalised to it, and it will just become just the average thing across all shops. But if you thought security was bad in Tesco, I kinda think that they're gonna need more security in this next place. Because we saw a job for a cleaner at a migrant hotel, as well as a night watchman as well, like a night supervisor. So they'd either be cleaning the rooms, like cleaning up after these migrants, as like bed linen and everything. That is not something that I'd recommend touching. Or you could be a night supervisor, where you've essentially just got to spend the night in a migrant hotel. And this one hotel had 150 bedrooms as well. So if they're 2 to a room, you've got to look after 300 migrants at night. I do think that some of these jobs, I mean, I am tempted to apply, especially that £64,000 Royal British Legion head of diversity. But I think with this job here, this has to be one of those jobs which I'm not even going to entertain the idea, not even going to think about applying, not even for a joke. I'm not cleaning up after these people, and I don't think anyone from Britain should. So if you made it this far in the video, first of all, grab a beer. Honestly, like, to just see the UK downfall laid out like that, you gotta get something that's gonna take the edge off. And secondly, thank you. This was a very long one for you to watch. Not just on a time level, but I mean, you probably aged like 10 years just by watching that. Like, that was some bad news after bad news. So like I said, it was a long one for you to watch, but they take even longer to edit. To be fair, usually, I'd say to make a 5-minute video, I'd say it probably takes about an hour to maybe about an hour and a half. So you can look at the length of this video and you can do the maths. Like, honestly, it's been a couple of long days putting all of this together. But hopefully you took some screenshots as well, because you'll never know when one of these articles is going to help you win a debate somewhere. But whether it's thousands of ULEZ cameras meeting their end, whilst we send millions to Albania, or maybe it's Tesco scanning shoppers looking to buy £1.50 chocolate bars in security boxes, you must admit, it can be pretty funny. Well, I guess end of the world type funny. So, thank you for becoming one of the 37,374 subscribers. Thank you to the channel members, and thank you for checking out this video on screen.
This country has gone crazy.